With the many rumours of a Metal Gear Solid remake in the air recently, I wanted to revisit the somewhat forgotten remake titled Metal Gear Solid: The Twin Snakes. The Twin Snakes released exclusively for the GameCube in 2004 and was developed by both Konami Computer Entertainment Japan and Canadian video game developer Silicon Knights. The idea behind the remake was to take the graphical and gameplay improvements introduced in MGS2 and apply these to MGS1. Gameplay improvements included mechanics such as being able to shoot in first person view, hanging from railings, the dive roll, dragging unconscious guards, holding up guards, and more. However, despite having an 85 on Metacritic as well as an 8.9 user score, I feel as though this game has developed a somewhat negative reputation in recent years, and so I wanted to make this video to try and steer the reputation of this game into a better light. First of all, I wanted to talk about the graphics. While I have a lot of love and nostalgia for the original Metal Gear Solid, there's really no denying that the graphics have aged and look very much of the PS1 era. I'm not trying to say that the graphics are bad as such, in fact I think it's one of the best looking games of the era, but if you gave someone who hadn't played the game the choice between the two, I think they'd pick the Twin Snakes solely based on the graphics. I personally love seeing the game recreated with MGS2 graphics. It's just cool to see these classic characters redesigned with improved character models. Now that's not to say that the character models are perfect. One thing I always notice when playing this game is the way the characters' arms rest at their sides. There's just something odd about it. I think it's the gap between the arm and the body that gets me. But that criticism aside, the character models look great to me. Also, just seeing Shadow Moses recreated in updated graphics also really impresses me. I think the game does a pretty good job of capturing the level design of the original game. Now let's talk about the gameplay. This for me is what makes or breaks the game for people. Some argue that with the introduction of the gameplay mechanics introduced in MGS2, it ends up kind of breaking the game. For example, you're now able to shoot cameras or guards from across a room, making the game easier. I've even seen people argue how it messes up the boss battles, particularly the duel with Revolver Ocelot, as you can now shoot him in first person, rather than chasing him around in circles, or squares I guess. However, I welcome these new mechanics. I love that it introduces a new way to play this beloved game. I think it created an experience that felt both familiar yet new at the same time. Plus, there are always ways to get around surveillance cameras with weapons like chaff grenades or stinger missiles later in the game. But if you do want it to feel more like the original, then you have the option to play the game that way too. You can still chase Ocelot around the room or throw grenades into Raven's tank, for example. Another area of contention with the game are the new cutscenes created for the game, written and directed by Ryuhei Kitamura. The main criticism of the cutscenes are the added matrixification, is that even a word? By which I mean there's quite a lot of bullet time added to them. And look, I can understand this criticism to a certain degree. It certainly takes some of the grander quality out of the original cutscenes, especially when Snake kicks off a fucking missile from behind the gunship to gain some more airtime. But to be honest, I think some of the cutscenes are pretty cool. I particularly love any scenes involving Snake and Grey Fox. The choreography between their fight scenes is exciting and really displays the skills of the two characters. Also, the scene when Grey Fox is taking out the guards in the hallway just looks sick. And it's not like the Metal Gear series is without silliness at times. Remember when Vamp outdid Jesus by running across water? You also have to consider the time period in which this game came out, which was just 5 years out of The Matrix. The early noughties were full of movies and video games trying to capitalise on the Matrix fever. But even if you're not a fan of the added cheesiness, most of the scenes are pretty well remade and tell the same story with great voice acting. Speaking of the voice acting, it was great that most of the original cast came back to re-record for this remake. If you didn't know, they tried to import the original voice soundtrack to the remake, but the improved audio hardware of the GameCube ended up revealing a lot of background noise, such as traffic, so they had to re-record for the remake. One criticism this remake receives, which I can agree with, is the music choices used throughout. While I can respect trying to bring something new to the game with a redone score, it just doesn't hold a candle to the score of the original game. The original score is still one of the best in video game history and just has an iconicness to it. The new score isn't terrible by any stretch, but when you do a side-by-side comparison of certain cutscenes, boss battles, or just general gameplay, the music quality is pretty night and day. But again, while I can understand and relate to this criticism, it doesn't ruin the game for me. Now you may be wondering how you can play this game. Unfortunately, that's where things get a little bit tricky, as the game never received an HD remaster or port of any kind outside of the GameCube. So your options are to get a hold of a GameCube and pay an extortionate second-hand price, or emulate the game via the Dolphin software. Emulation is pretty solid too, despite the odd minor flaw here and there, namely the blue backgrounds on codec calls, but you can get the game to look really good and up to date. Overall, I just enjoy the Twin Snakes and think it's a pretty good remake of the original game. I love each game for different reasons and often replay them both. There's elements in each game which I prefer over the other, and I think it's worth experiencing the differences for yourself. As I stated at the start of the video, I've just found the reputation of this game has taken a bad turn in recent years, and while I can understand some of the criticism, I find the hate for the remake really unwarranted. But that's just my opinion. I'd love to hear your opinions of the game in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing for more Metal Gear Solid content. See you next time.